Hello and welcome to the What Are You Doing podcast. This is Michael Beach and I'm your host for this podcast, and I'm telling you folks, you are in for a treat. You've landed on the show for thought leaders who are investing in the next generation of leadership for their organization. This is also the show for emerging leaders who want to become that next generation of great leaders. We're especially excited today to have the opportunity to introduce you to today's special guest, my friend, and an extraordinary leader in his own right, Michael Andersen. Michael is the creator of the breakthrough intentional sales management system and the author of one of my favorite books, A Culture of Predictable Sales. Michael is a renowned national sales coach and fractional chief sales officer who's known for his keen ability to ask just the right questions and then to integrate unique marketing positioning with his own proven best practices to help accelerate sales for companies in need of growth. His books and his talks focus on providing actionable insights that produce immediate result. Michael has been growing and starting businesses ever since he was in the third grade. He's founded what went on to become the largest mid-market CRM implementation company in North America. And these days, he's become a go-to resource for businesses and private equity firms seeking top-shelf expertise to help them to effect a sales turnaround. I could go on, but in the interest of getting him onto the show now, I'll simply ask that you join me in providing a warm welcome to Michael Andersen. Michael, welcome.
Thank you, Michael. It was hard to sit here and listen to all of that. I really appreciate that. That was over the top. Thank you, and I'm so glad to be here with you today. And I've been following what you've been involved with in your career and building your teams of people as well. And there's an awful lot to say for the talent that you bring and the skills that you help people develop. And I'm so overjoyed to be here joining you today.
Well, we're just as happy to have you, and thank you for all those kind comments. The check, my friend, is in the mail. Michael, before we get into any questions, I would love to ask you a little bit about some of the things that you're doing that you might want to put in the spotlight for our listeners today. Is there anything you'd like to share with our audience?
Yes, I would love to share. We just had the new book come out in January, A Culture of Predictable Sales, and that book is available on Amazon. And it's a book that actually was it's the second book I wrote. The first book I wrote was actually what we now call intentional sales management. It's really a methodology. In some ways, it's like a textbook. It's a textbook with a lot of stories from my career. But as I had my editor reading it through, he says, "Michael, did you intend for people to actually read this book?" I was like, "Oh my goodness, what's he talking about?" He says, No, it's really well written. But he says, "I don't think I can see anyone putting this on the nightstand." And so I wrote this book as the second book as a business novel with takeaway chapters that really give you an overview of the stuff that I've been working with for years, and I'd love for people to pick up on that.
Wonderful. Well, I think if my editor had said something like that to me, I've not yet finished a book, it might have stopped my heart. So I'm so glad that you're still with us. Michael, did you intend for anybody to read this book? Boy, that would have gotten my attention. All right. We're going to take a short break to hear a word from our sponsor, and we'll be back in a moment.
So if your listeners are interested in picking up a engaging business novel story about a sales manager in a small to medium-sized Midwestern company that has a team of people working for him and family that he integrates with, and really some insights into his life and the lessons that he learns as he grows as a sales manager, picking up my book at Amazon or a local bookstore, A Culture of Predictable Sales, One Sales Manager's Journey, would be great. Alternatively, and as a special offer for your listeners, I have a website, www.intentionalsalesmanagement.com. If you go to that, you can sign up for free access to a webinar that I put in place. There's 6 sessions that total about 2 hours in length, where I've really expounded on a lot of the principles and ideas out of my book. And when you finish that, you'll be given a special offer to receive a free copy of my book as well. So I would like to make that offer specifically to your podcast listeners, Michael. www.intentionalsalesmanagement.com. Sign up for the free seminar webinar, and then you'll also get the opportunity to get a free copy of my book.
Hey, we're back. Thank you for listening to our commercial, and we're back to our guest. Well, hey, we like to have fun on this show, Michael. So one of the things I'm big into is music, and I suspect that you might have some favorite musical artists yourself. Anybody that you would like to share with our audience that you just really enjoy their music?
You know, I enjoy music an awful lot, and quite a bit of the music that I take up with now is Christian contemporary music, and I really enjoy the message that that comes from that. But going back, you know, all of us build our music interests as we're younger, and Billy Joel just comes to mind, and he's got a number of hit songs, and I really enjoy one in particular that a lot of people probably haven't heard is Scenes from an Italian Restaurant. It's a very instrumental and very well put together song that just kind of makes you go reminisce back into the days and put you in a place that you aren't sitting. And I really enjoy that.
I think I'm time traveling right now. A bottle of red, a bottle of white. Great song. Wonderful stuff.
I think I'm going to leave that to Billy Joel to do the singing, though.
Yeah, there you go. Well, that's the only time you're ever going to hear me sing, I guarantee you.
All right.
At what point in your career, Michael, did you become interested in leadership? How did you become involved in developing leaders?
You know, I was, interested in leadership as the company that I founded grew from just being myself, to having 6 locations across the United States and obviously many employees. And I would say between the School of Hard Knocks and working side by side with the leadership of many companies that I had as clients, it was intriguing to me to work alongside those leaders of different businesses, everything from a family run, business that provided yard work and had expanded into golf course maintenance to your Fortune 100 companies like Wells Fargo or Sprint. It's interesting. In life, you observe different things, and for whatever reason, that certain things just are a spark for you. You just right. Really get into it. You're really interested in it, and other people look at it and say, well, that's interesting on the surface, but I wouldn't want to go that deep. Well, leadership was always that way for me, and I could kind of take you through my journey of that, give you that perspective. When I started my company, I have to admit, I started it with not enough money. I thought I had enough. I started it right out of college, and I had amassed $50,000 that I'd saved while I was going through college, in addition to paying for college, and I thought I had the world, by the tail. And I started it, and I pretty quickly figured out that it just wasn't enough in order to actually compete. I either needed deeper pockets to be able to hire great talent, or I had to do something else unique to bring something to the table. And what I did was somewhat out of necessity. I started hiring college students, really smart ones, really good ones. I kind of got the knack for figuring that out. And then I helped develop them into leaders in my company. And I'm proud of the fact that, several of them actually own their own company, their own successful companies now. And over the years, I just kind of, I kind of continued down that route and continued to watch other leaders and really just try to implement those things into what I was doing. And one day, a colleague and customer of mine, really, he just kind of took me aside and he says, it just seems like you have such a knack for that. And yet you're all into this technology stuff in my tech company. And it was about the right time for me to sell the company anyway. And so I just that was the nudge I took. I took a jump, and that was about 13 years ago now.
Okay. Well, that's wonderful. Thank you for walking us through that story. Michael, did you have any leadership mentors along the way as you were coming up through the ranks who made a big impression on you or a big investment in you?
That's a really interesting question. I mean, there's so many. There's so many people that I could give credit to, and there's books that I read, and just all the little things that you pick up over a career. But I would have to say that my inspiration and really the start of my learning what leadership was about was from my father. Really the most influential I ever had. He taught me a ton about how to lead people. He was his career was primarily in the health insurance industry. After being the deputy insurance commissioner for the state of Iowa, he was hired into Blue Cross and Blue Shield and spent the rest of his career around the country in different roles.
Okay.
He was an actuary. Some people don't know what an actuary is. It's kind of that nerdy statistics, research. They do all this high-end math stuff. It's like a high-end math degree. And he was brought up he got an actuarial degree. Generally in insurance companies, those are not the people that you see jumping around to roles like VP of sales, VP of operations, VP of HR. But these are all roles that he held in various times and for several years within Blue Cross. And the reason really was that, he told me, he says, Michael, he says, I got a C in statistics. Well, that's like the foundation of what you do at actuarial. Right. I was like, well, what are you doing? He says, I just kind of figured out how to get people to really care about working for me and to understand that I cared about working for them and that I was putting them first. And he says, I was able to take that and move it into HR, move it into sales, move it into actuarial, and it did a really good job of covering up what I didn't know myself in actuarial. So I really felt like what he taught me was leadership and how to get people to want to work for him. I really knew that he was good, but it just became so clear to me. I remember very clearly a day when I was out calling on a new account with one of my salespeople at my technology company. And we went in to meet with the president of that company. And we sat down and I introduced myself. And when she saw my card and my name, my last name was spelled Andersen, S-E-N, which is a little bit strange. There's a lot of more S-O-Ns. And she looked at me and she says, you don't happen to know, and she said my father's name. And I said, well, I sure do. That's my father. And it just broke the whole formality of the meeting. And she started going on probably at least 10 minutes telling me about him as a leader, as a mentor, and what impact that he had had on her career. And even a moment at that time, a soft moment, I saw a tear coming out of her eye. She said, you just don't know how impactful he was in my career. And she hadn't worked for him for 10 or 15 years at that point.
Wow.
And I just thought to myself, the significance of the things that he had taught me, that it would have an impact on someone that successful that many years later to get emotional about the impact, how he'd helped her. And so from him, I really learned that what you have to do is you have to work with others, you have to serve others, and you have to have them want to work with you. And that's really, I think, at the foundation of leadership.
Wow, what a moving story and a great tribute to your father, Michael. It sounds to me like his ripple effect on others was pretty profound and pretty far-reaching. That's a great story. Thanks for sharing that with us.
For sure.
I have to imagine that a dynamic leader like yourself, Michael, must invest in yourself to become a better leader over time. Can you share with our audience a little bit about what you're doing to raise the level of your leadership game?
Well, Michael, obviously, I think any of us that are writing books are probably also reading books, and any of us that are also listening. At least I hope that we are. I think that there's a lot of that knowledge that you look through and you read and it just kind of absorbs. It just kind of becomes a part of the fabric of who you are. I think one of the things, though, that has really been impactful over the last, I don't know what it's been now, maybe 8 to 10 years, and you're very familiar with it as well, is I'm a part of a group called the Professional Business Coaches Alliance. And it's a group of other folks who work like I do, and I think you do as well, with business leaders and emerging leaders and executives and sales leaders. And we come together and we just kind of share with each other what we've learned. And it's amazing every time I get together with that group. And Michael, because you've been there alongside me in many of these meetings, we just kind of shake our head and go, wow, pretty neat experience. I would highly recommend, if you are a person who in your circle, you can find a circle of peers. When I was the president of the technology company, I call a tab group, and it doesn't really matter what the format was, but we were together for 6 or 7 years, that group of presidents, and we would share with each other. We would learn from each other. It's really beneficial to get with people who don't work for you, don't have a specific stake in whatever's being said, but that you can just share with and learn from.
Well, I'm really glad that you mentioned the PBCA, Michael. Like you, I've traveled to a lot of the PBCA events. I go to every one that I'm able to attend because I get back probably at least 4 or 5 times whatever I've invested to travel and stay for a few days at the events. It's always well worth the investment. And over the years, I've had the ability to sort of drink deeply from the wisdom of some of the giants that have made the PBCA such a great alliance. Guys like John Denny and Rob Scher out in the Bay Area, Jim Wigginton down in South Carolina, and Jeff Rogers in New York, Kevin West in Ohio. There's a bunch of great coaches in the PBCA, and I've learned a thing or two from it, just about every one of them.
For sure.
Michael, as you develop leaders in the organizations that you've worked with over your career, have you come to some conclusions about maybe some changes that an emerging leader might need to make if they want to improve their leadership skills as they're growing?
Yeah, that's a good question, Michael. And I know that you're focused on leadership overall in what we're talking about here. But as you know, I've been working primarily with sales leaders, so I'd like to constrain my answer to sales leadership. Is that all right?
Yeah, that'd be fantastic.
Okay. So I think the first tip that I would share with a sales leader, how to improve their skills, is to remind them of something they probably kind of already knew, but I'll put it this way. You can't convince anybody of anything. They have to convince themselves. I've heard and taught a leadership style that's similar to something that they refer to as servant leadership. Mm-hmm. And if you want to lead someone somewhere, you aren't going to get them to do it by grabbing a rope, putting it around their neck, and dragging them there. You can't convince them of anything. They've got to convince themselves. And so that servant leadership premise says you have to truly care about the people you're leading. You have to care enough about them and their future that they believe that you are their number one advocate. Because that's when they give you the opportunity to participate in helping them decide how they want to proceed the next stage of their career, the next step of whatever they're doing. If you haven't earned that, sure, you can stand over them with the rights and authority that you've been given by your role and position, but it isn't leadership, that's management. If you don't take the time to invest in them and understand where they're coming from, how they prefer and need to absorb information, or how to apply best practices to their style without changing who they are, your leadership's going to just be very limited in scope and results.
Interesting.
In my intentional sales management methodology, I've thrown a few tools out there that have really been helpful. Honestly, as I said earlier in this discussion, I kind of stumbled and bumbled my way through some of this, right? I had some premises that I had been given from an early age, and I had, various learnings that I was gaining over time, but I learned a lot of stuff, through hard knocks. But what I've done more recently is I've developed this, as I've sat down and tried to codify what I've learned into some tools. And there's a couple tools that we have there that I think are really helpful. One of them is the mentorship ladder, and the other is the coaching spectrum. Mentorship ladder is basically 7 rungs that you cooperatively climb with your salesperson as they're ready, as they are willing to climb with you, to the point where you have built a true trusted partnership relationship. So it really forms that foundation that we're talking about that gives you the right to actually lead and gives you the opportunity. And then the coaching spectrum, it describes 5 different communication styles or maps that you can match to your salesperson's needs and perspectives in any moment, so that the communication you're having is going to be most effective and actually bring about results. These are, tools that if you learn them and understand them, they just really create the backbone of how to create that leadership relationship. And as I mentioned, gain a position where you can have influence. The second I would probably share can be summed up with a quote from my favorite book, the Bible. It says, "For which of you intending to build a tower doesn't sit down first and count the cost to ensure whether you're going to be able to finish it? Lest by some chance they've laid the foundation and you're not able to finish it, everybody that sees you is going to mock you." Well, it's amazing to me how many salespeople get up every day and respond and react to everything around them. They don't have a specific goal. They don't even have a specific plan if they had a goal. They're just subject to what I call the tyranny of the urgent. I was in a meeting, it was a number of years ago, in a company, and it was a seed company in the agricultural business.
Okay.
I was standing up front, and we had a whole group of salespeople in there, along with their boss, their boss's boss, and their boss's boss's boss. And I asked the question. I said, "So, how do you guys decide each day what you're going to go do, what activities you're going to pursue, and where you're going to go?" And I didn't get a whole lot of, you have to kind of pause a little bit. And one young kid, I'm going to call him, because I kind of see him that way in terms of his answer, raised his hand, and in front of all these people, he said, "Well, I get up in the morning and I get down to the end of my driveway. And if I turn left, then I go that direction and I work with those farmers. And if I turn right, then I go that direction and I go work with those farmers." You should have seen the look on the executives' faces as they were listening to this answer.
I can only imagine.
I mean, you can't make this stuff up, right? I mean, that was quite the answer, and it's emblematic of what a lot of salespeople do, even if they're smart enough not to say that in front of all the bosses. So, in addition to that being their plan for the day, their plan for a sales meeting they're going into is, and they'll defend this, is wing it. Right? Because any planning might constrain me and might get me, on the wrong side of things or whatever. So their plan is to wing it, and they really, in my opinion, in my experience, have a lot more hope than they do plans. What I think is even more interesting in that is how many sales leaders both accept that from their people and run their own daily routine in the exact same way. If you ask them, they'll start making, I'm going to say, excuses about how what they do just isn't predictable at all. Sometimes they go so far above, sometimes these excuses are covering the fact that there are certain days where the production that they bring in is so far above what they had told the production teams that was going to happen in a manufacturing environment, as an example, that, you know, it's there's all kinds of questions. How are we going to deliver this? How are we going to keep our customers happy? And then other times, production's sitting around, you know, wanting to lay people off because they're worried that sales didn't come through with their expectations.
Right.
It's not like we have this crystal ball or anything, right?
Right.
But as sales managers, if we want our teams to have their hands on the steering wheel, we got to identify what we want. We got to determine best practice activities that we think are going to get us there, and then track progress in order to adjust plans fluidly as time goes on. Mm-hmm. We can't just make excuses, run our territories with whatever goes left or goes right. We've got to lead from the front. And that means we need to have some planning and insist that we get that from our salespeople too. I think those are the two things. You know, get in with your people, make sure they believe that you are with them and that you've earned the right to provide leadership, and then actually lead by providing plans and helping drive to a particular location.
You mentioned your great book, and you know I'm a big fan of it. I gave it to a lot of my clients as a Christmas gift last year. The two tools that you mentioned in your remarks were the mentorship ladder and the coaching spectrum. And for those of you who are listening who are sales managers, you really need to get a copy of this book. And you will find that simply the tools that Michael put in the book make it worth the price. But the story is fantastic as well. I love the idea, Michael, that salespeople need to have a specific plan to reach their chosen goals. I've noticed many times young people in sales who probably were about as random as the guy you were talking about, who some days he goes to the farmers on the left, and if he decides he's going to turn right, he goes to the farmers on the right. One particular young sales guy I was talking to one day told me that his job was to sell stuff. And I said, okay, how do you go about that? And he said, well, I show up at the office every day ready to sell stuff. So, well, that's a great plan. How's it going? You guys know the answer to that, right? Michael, have you noticed, as you've been working with sales leaders over the years, any particular obstacles or barriers that they tend to get slowed down by or stuck behind?
Yeah. There's a couple of different things that leaders get kind of tripped up on, I think.
Okay.
That's a good question, Michael. I think a lot of leaders have the right interest in helping the downtrodden and fixing problems. You know, sometimes as managers, our view is that all day, all we do is have people come to us with problems and we fix them. Mm-hmm. And as a sales manager is really no different. We kind of take an interest in that salesperson that's not accomplishing what they needed to, and we get all focused on we're going to make them be successful. We take pride in the fact that we're taking someone who's failing and turn them into success. And that leads us into spending time with salespeople on our team who aren't necessarily very good at selling. You know, one of my colleagues says that 70 to 80% of the people in sales really shouldn't be. And it's admirable. You know, it's certainly a positive trait that we want to help people who need help. Right. And at the same time, are we helping them? At the same time, are we helping them accomplish something that's best for them? Or are we trying to get them better at something that they really would be better if they did something different? And I think that we have to keep that in mind. Rather than extend the talents of a person who is not necessarily built or designed or should be in that role, what if we took that time and instead extended the talents of those who actually have a capacity to grow? Mm-hmm. But the barrier is even more insidious than the sound of, what I said of us wanting to help people. After we spend some of that time investing, of course, we're too invested to quit. Because now this has become a failure not only on their part, but a failure on ours if we don't get them to succeed.
Right.
And we add to that we assume, since we aren't recruiting on a constant basis, that it's going to be really hard to replace them. And whatever little piece they're bringing to the table is better than nothing that we would probably have for who knows how long if we needed to go out and try to recruit a replacement. So we just keep sinking time into the wrong people. And I think, my first, you said barrier or obstacle is figure out who you should be investing your time in to get the best results and optimize spending your time in that place with those people on those topics. I'd say the other thing that often happens is cultural. It's something we allow to happen culturally. And I mentioned it earlier in a previous question that you asked. I talked about that sales managers will sometimes make excuses for why they don't have a plan, why nothing's predictable.
Right.
That is kind of a symptom of the second point I'm going to make, which is that we allow an environment where excuses are acceptable.
Okay.
If you're sitting down and you're managing an accounting person who's supposed to enter 25 invoices into the system, it's easy to say, did you do what you needed to get that done, or did you twiddle your thumbs? It's easy to not think that excuses are reasonable. On the other hand, in sales, there's so many variables out there, and there's not an absolute. You can't absolutely win every deal if you do everything right. So there's always room for excuses, but what we do sometimes is we let them become too rampant. It's one thing to make a mistake, not recognize a best practice, or just get beat by the competition, right? I mean, that's going to happen.
Right.
But when we make excuses about that, and we tell ourselves something like, well, that customer was just price focused. They were never going to be a buyer.
Right.
What we've done is we've written off the need to reflect and improve. With that logic, all we have to do is wait for the right customer to come along who isn't price focused and is a real buyer. And in some ways, that might be a right next step. But if we don't allow ourselves to go deeply into it and ask ourselves the real question of, is there something I could have done to detect that earlier so I could have spent less time and I could have deselected them? Or is there something I could have done to have adjusted that I didn't try, some best practice I didn't implement that I should try the next time to see if it helps? Sales managers, I know, on top of that, sometimes even unknowingly make excuses for their salespeople. I was sitting in a meeting of a executive over about 250 sales people nationally for a large banking company, one of the top 5 in the country, a number of years ago. And I was at the sales meeting, the annual sales meeting, because I was participating on the stage in presenting some things to them. But his introduction, he went on for about 5 minutes, explaining to them why they didn't hit their numbers, underlining that it was acceptable. And here's all the reasons why we didn't hit our numbers last year. And I thought to myself in that moment, I wonder if anybody in this room now thinks that there's anything they should have learned from last year.
Right.
So as sales managers, sometimes in our attempt to kind of convince ourselves and perhaps others in the company that we're doing okay, we end up allowing and creating and even supporting an excuse culture within our own ranks that works insidiously against us in terms of really learning and moving on and taking the next step. We can't allow ourselves to not get the full benefit and return on investment of any failure that someone makes on our team.
Amen, brother. I'm right there with you. I think accountability is a big, big deal. And I get uncomfortable when we start excusing away a rough quarter or a rough year. Michael, many of our tribe of listeners are aspiring and emerging leaders. What would you like to recommend to them about investing in others to help them, those others, to develop as great leaders themselves?
Yeah. So I think what you're saying, Mike, let me make sure I understand what you're saying. You want to know what is the biggest thing we can do as a leader to someone else that will help develop in them the ability to lead others additionally.
You are absolutely correct. Okay. Perfect.
All right. I hate to, keep, rehashing the same thing over and over again, but I think you've probably gotten my theme by now, that leadership really comes down to how the other person feels about you. And I think that rather than teaching someone about leadership, what you need to help them do is experience good leadership. I think a lot of people learn a lot more from what they experience than what they read in a book. And so the best thing you can do is to actually be a great leader to them so that they will then model that to the people that work for them. I think I'll just tell you a quick story that has been impactful to a few people I've coached. Okay. That's helped kind of drive that point home. All right. Just right. How far you should go. So I had an administrative assistant that worked for me for a number of years. And she was young, aspiring, smart, good, really good work ethic, loyal. And we developed a really good, positive relationship with each other. And I'd implemented the kinds of things that I'm recommending here in this discussion today with her, and she'd been very receptive to it. One day, she was talking to me in our one-on-one, and she was sharing with me that she was thinking that it might have become time for her to get a better apartment. Now, she was very financially responsible. She was a Dave Ramsey follower. Mm-hmm. Her dad had taught her how to save money. And, I knew how much she made. And her car and her apartment, they didn't reflect that. No problem with that. I'm not judging her. I'm just saying they didn't reflect that level. So I knew she had to have quite a bit of money in savings. She had to. And the time she was talking to me was back in around 2009, I think, back in the housing crisis time when the government had responded with a program that was really a superior program. It was like $8,000 or $9,000 for first-time home buyers. It was this grant that if you would get your first-time home and live there for a few years, they would basically take that and grant you that money.
Wonderful.
It's the most recent thing that's even close to that is some of the stuff that they're doing in stimulus now for the Corona stuff, where there's actual grants of money that you can obtain. This was kind of unheard of, and I think really once in a lifetime for first-time home buyers to have that kind of opportunity. So I kind of said to her, I said, well, I don't know if moving to a better apartment is in your long-term best interest. Have you considered buying a condo? And she said, oh, well, I'm not married. I'm not at that point in my life. She had all the reasons, right? And I explained to her about the financial situation and the government and the money and the once in a lifetime and all that stuff. And bottom line, she ended up buying a condo and getting, 10% equity, plus she put her 20% down. So with the grant, she had 30% equity in that thing. From the day she walked into it, as long as she lived there for a couple of years. And, she made out like a bandit with this opportunity. I mean, it was a really good financial move for her. And, she really appreciated it. And I would have to say that the return I got on taking the time to sit there and go through that with her, and then the follow-ups of helping her to go through the process of getting all the things done that it took and all the advice she wanted on buying houses and all these other things, it paid dividends for years to me. Yeah. Even though that had nothing to do with what she was doing or mentoring her on how she was doing in her administrative job or the business we were in or anything. I think the point here is that she was open to asking me for advice on a personal matter like that.
Right.
And not only that, but also taking it, which then led to a massive win, right?
Right.
And that's the level. That's the level that I recommend leaders go to in investing in their proteges. It's not about, I care about you as long as you're in this job. It's I care about you at every level. Now, we have to be careful about not crossing boundaries and those sorts of things.
Sure.
But I trust that if you know the person well enough, if you care enough about them, that you will understand where those boundaries are and you will navigate those together. But in doing that level of investment, that's where you are going to get the dividends that pay and pay and pay. I think when we're talking about investing in people, some leaders just don't go deep enough. They don't understand what it means to truly care about the people we work with and then maintain a long-term perspective, investing in others a yield that will go beyond the time that they even work for you and with you.
Well, that is a tremendous example of making a significant and relevant investment in one of your associates. And that's a great lesson for our emerging leaders in the audience. What Michael is saying is, you can give a person a book on leadership and that'll help them. But a better gesture would be to just give them some great leadership and let them experience it. And then they'll learn that way instead of out of reading a book.
That's right, Michael.
Great point, Michael. So, Michael, my last question for you today. You have a very distinguished record of developing high-performing teams. Do you have any observations about how to develop strong collaboration and teamwork on the teams that you're working with?
Sure. So again, we're talking about sales teams here, and I just want to start by saying, and Michael, I know you were involved in sales leadership too, so I'm sure you connect with this point, that the general feel of sales by the non-sales people in the company doesn't tend to be very positive. There's this correlation they create of between their sales team and timeshare and used car, and it really they have a skewed perspective of the environment that salespeople have to live in and the confidence that salespeople project. And this stereotype is projected on the salespeople by most of the others or many of the others in the company. You'd think that salespeople would be revered as the tip of the spear, but in many ways they're kind of seen as this other animal from another race, right? And I'm sure you've experienced that, seen that too, right, Michael?
I certainly have.
Yeah.
Those salespeople are cowboys.
Yeah, exactly. Cowboy.
Yeah.
So what happens, and the reason I bring that up, is that common stereotype that's projected on the salespeople naturally provides a basis for teammanship among the sales. Because when you are a part of a common group that you perceive that together you're getting the raw end of the stick from some other group, you tend to stick together because of that common cause, right? And so
Absolutely.
Salespeople, I think, feel a bit like a minority group, and they just get respected by each other, right? And the other is getting each other, understanding each other, and all of that. And so that, I think, really works well. So teamwork in sales, I would say, is a mixture of friendly competition, right, among people who mutually respect each other's talents, and a feeling of solidarity from experiencing the same wild world of customer and prospects together. So that, I think, is something that as a leader you help to you help them to feel that way. You use that to your advantage. Now, I'm not suggesting that in any way you would feed into that feeling, but you use the fact that they feel like they're a team and that they have a common cause, help them to see how they're going to prove themselves to the rest of the company, to help them see how their mutual talents are bringing about an effect overall in the company. And that's what I think you use to help guide that into a positive direction for teammanship. Next, I think is another fact that we face with salespeople, and that is that they see themselves as lone wolves, cowboys, as you said, and mini CEOs of their own companies.
Right.
Now, there's an advantage to them viewing themselves that way, very independently, not team-oriented, right? Because in many cases, salespeople have their own territories and their own regions that they work, and they're frequently separated, so they kind of do have to do some of their own thing. So if they were all about nesting and all about, getting the team together and hoorah and we're going to pass the ball between, then they would have some frustrations with the loneliness that sometimes you feel as a salesperson when you're out on your own trying to get something to accomplish and nobody's going with you.
Right.
But you'll notice that in most complex sales, which I more work with companies who have a more complex sale, more value-oriented sell, where they're trying to convince someone that there's something other than the lowest price that should be paid for a product or service because of the value.
Right.
What we generally are going to see is that we're introducing different members of the team to the customer. As an example, at different points, you might bring in technical team members, senior salespeople or managers or others into that overall circle in order to help accomplish the sale. So that group that has to be brought into the customer has to have a team concept as well. And in those situations, I call those three-legged sales calls. Each member needs to feed off each other for insight and energy. And they have to define the roles and then stick to them. And that's one of the biggest things I see that goes wrong with three-legged sales calls, is that the team hasn't come together and figured out who's going to do what. Kind of like you would put together, like the United States used to in basketball, where we took the very best, players from different teams that weren't a part of a team, stuck them together, didn't spend any time building them, and said, "Well, surely we're going to have the Olympic best basketball team." And it didn't work because you had a bunch of independent individuals who weren't cohesive. And so one of the biggest things sales managers need to do before they go into a three-legged sales call or a 6 or 10-legged sales call, right, is make sure that we each understand our roles. Are we the quarterback? Are we the receiver? Just whichever area or role we're supposed to play. Are we the lineman? And that means we do what in this call together. And that is what allows it to all work together fluidly. So as a team leader, we try to build on both these fronts, right? We try to build the mutual respect that we have for each other because of our similarity in our role in the company, as well as the mutual support that we have for each other as we work together to accomplish goals and depend on each other to be able to get the outcomes. And that is what helps us to create a cohesive team of rugged individualists that spur each other on.
Fantastic.
Well, that's our episode for today, leaders. We want to thank our special guest, Michael Andersen, the author, business advisor, and man about town. Thank you, Michael, for contributing your time, your energy, and sharing some great stories with our What Are You Doing listeners. We sure appreciate you. We appreciate your contribution to the program and to the ongoing success of our tribe. Our next episode is going to be a blast. It's going to feature Josh Harris, the Chief Executive Officer, and Clint May, the Chief Operating Officer of Gray Mechanical, a mechanical contracting and mechanical services firm located in Houston, Texas. And these are a couple of guys that are about as plugged into investing in leadership and developing leadership so that they can take their company to the next level as any two guys I've ever met. Hearing from them should make for another great episode again. Thank you, listeners, for joining us today. And please reach out to us at info@michaelbeachcoach.com. If you've got a great suggestion for a future episode special guest, or perhaps you want to become a featured guest yourself, we'd love that. We'll look forward to spending our next episode together with you. Until then, remember, you must be at your best. It doesn't cost any more to be nice, so go ahead and be nice. We believe that being positive and appreciative beats being negative and entitled, hands down, every single time. See you next time.